More than 300 people came to my husband's funeral. I didn't expect that number. Daniel had never been the kind of man who spoke loudly in rooms or demanded attention. He listened more than he talked. He built things quietly: relationships, businesses, favors that people remembered long after they were done. I stood beside the casket for hours, shaking hands with people who told me stories I had never heard. A former employee said Daniel had paid for his daughter's college tuition when the man lost his job. A neighbor described how Daniel showed up every winter to shovel her driveway before she woke up. An old friend from 30 years ago cried while explaining how Daniel once helped him out of a financial disaster and never asked for repayment. I nodded through all of it, grateful and slightly disoriented. It is a strange feeling to mourn a man and discover how much of his life existed just outside your field of vision. By the time the service ended, the church was still half full. People lingered in the aisles. Some cried quietly. Others spoke in low voices like they didn't want to disturb something sacred. That's when my daughters arrived. All 5 of them together. Late. Their heels clicked against the marble floor as they entered, moving as a small group the way sisters sometimes do when they aren't quite comfortable standing alone. They were dressed appropriately: black coats, careful makeup, polite expressions. But there was something hurried about them. Not grief. Something else. They hugged me one by one, each embrace brief and careful. "Mom, we're so sorry," one of them said. Another asked if I had eaten. Then there was a pause. The kind of pause where everyone feels the real question waiting. Finally, the oldest cleared her throat. "So, when will you read the will?" The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. For a moment I simply looked at their faces, 5 women I had once carried in my arms, now standing in front of me like polite strangers waiting for an appointment. I could see curiosity behind their sympathy, calculation behind their patience. I felt something inside my chest tighten, though not from anger exactly. More like recognition. The distance between us hadn't started today. It had been growing for years in quiet ways: missed holidays, shorter phone calls, assumptions about money that no one ever said directly. Daniel had noticed it long before I did. I exhaled slowly. "Fine," I said. They seemed relieved by how quickly I agreed. Then I added something else. "For the next 25 nights, you'll come to the house." Their expressions shifted. "There are letters your father left behind," I continued. "One for each night." A small silence followed. The youngest frowned slightly. "Letters?" I nodded. "We open them one at a time." "And the will?" the oldest asked. "The will is after the letters." That evening we sat in the living room where the furniture still smelled faintly of Daniel's cologne. On the coffee table sat a wooden box I had never seen before his final week. Inside were 25 envelopes. His handwriting on each one. The family lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, sat quietly in the corner chair. He had already explained the structure earlier that day. Daniel had written the will months ago. But he had also left instructions. The document would only be formally read after the letters had been opened in sequence. It wasn't symbolic. It was written directly into the legal process. Authority makes strange things feel unavoidable. The oldest daughter opened the first envelope. Daniel's voice appeared in the room through ink and paper. He wrote about a camping trip 20 years earlier, one the girls barely remembered. He described how each of them reacted differently to the rainstorm that ruined the second night. One had laughed. One had cried. One had tried to fix the tent. One had blamed everyone else. The youngest had slept through most of it. By the end of the letter, a few faint smiles appeared, but the mood remained cautious. Night 2 was another memory. Night 3, a story about a broken bicycle he had repaired without telling anyone. The daughters listened politely, though I could see impatience flickering beneath the surface. By the 7th letter, the tone changed. Daniel began writing about the years when the girls were teenagers. The fights he overheard upstairs. The things he wished he had handled differently. He admitted he had sometimes mistaken silence for peace. That night no one left quickly. By the 10th letter, questions began appearing. Did that really happen? One daughter asked another. Wait, I thought Mom paid for that. Small pieces of the past rearranged themselves. The 15th letter contained something even I didn't know. Daniel wrote about a financial mistake he made decades earlier. An investment that nearly collapsed the business before the girls were born. The reason he worked such long hours in their childhood suddenly had a different explanation. Not ambition. Repair. The room stayed quiet for a long time after that one. One daughter stared at the carpet for several minutes before speaking. I always thought you just liked work more than us. Daniel's words had been written months earlier, but somehow they answered. The letters continued. Some were apologies. Some were observations about how the sisters had grown apart over small misunderstandings that no one corrected. One night the third daughter cried quietly while reading. Another night the youngest laughed out loud at a story about stealing cookies from the kitchen when she was 7. By the 20th letter, they started arriving early. No one mentioned the will anymore. The final envelope sat alone in the box. The oldest opened it carefully. Daniel's handwriting was slightly shakier in this one. He wrote that families often drift without noticing, that love becomes assumed instead of practiced. Then came the last request. Before the will could be read, the 5 daughters had to make one decision together, unanimously. Not about money. About something else he had left unfinished. The room fell silent. For the first time in years, the sisters began talking to each other honestly. Not arguing. Just talking. I sat in Daniel's chair and listened. Whatever happened next, whether they agreed or not, the distance that had filled this house for years had finally been interrupted. And for the moment, that felt like the real inheritance he had left behind.